Hello guys, I normally Google my game quite often just to see how people play it and to improve the gameplay based on their feedback. And recently I watched this video of this kid playing my game and it was pretty entertaining to watch him playing it. Here's the video if you want to watch it. He does pretty funny sounds. He asked me a lot to make a video about game design document, and it happened so that the past week in my free time I was working on a game design document for my next game, which is called Endurance. It's going to be a prequel of the game which I've already done. First of all, I'm gonna tell you what game design document is. It's a very important thing in development of any game. Wikipedia says that a game design document is a highly descriptive living software design document of design for a video game. And a game design document is created and edited by the development team, and it is primarily used in the video game industry to organize efforts within development team. So this explanation is pretty complex. So I would say basically in the beginning of development of any game you just have an idea on your head. And this idea is normally very abstract and it doesn't have details in it. It's actually delays your game development when you start working on your game. Because sometimes you just don't know where to start or how big is the scale of the project, and it can be quite overwhelming. Because without knowing the amount of work you need to do in order to create a game, you can't plan accordingly your time and resources. That's when you need a game design document. So it's the very first thing you need to work on before starting working on your game. In your game design document, you have to write down all the things that are going to be in your game. Assets, story, platforms you're going to develop it for, designs, mechanics, everything. It's not an easy job and you will need to spend quite a bit of time on it, but after that everything going to be much clearer and much easier for you when you start working on your actual game. And now I'm gonna show you my example of game design document which I will use for my game Endurance. And so first of all I want to tell you something. I'm going to cover some of the text in this document because I don't want to reveal the whole concepts of the game, the whole twists in the story or whatever. So that's why I'm going to cover them. So the first of all, I have this nice picture of Endurance, of the spaceship in the space, which is very cool. The first thing you need to write down is the overview of the game. So in the overview, you normally briefly write what kind of game is it, what kind of genre, what player does, is it like paid game or is it free game, is it a multiplayer game or maybe it's a story driven game, how many levels it has, brief overview of the game itself. If it's a mobile game, does it have enough purchases or maybe it doesn't. So after that we need to write the target platform, which platform we're going to target. So in this case, I'm going to target iOS, Android, and PC version for Steam. For Switch, probably too, and I'm not sure about macOS, but maybe, we'll see. Then we're moving to the visual style. So in this one, you have to make some kind of research. Maybe you can use Pinterest website, which is pretty cool. When you need to find some kind of ideas for your visual style of the game. And I mean, in this case, in my case particularly, I'm going to use more or less the same style which I used for the previous game, but I'm going to improve the graphics a little bit, and so, but pretty much it's going to remain the same. So after that, we are moving to the audio style. So for this thing, I normally use YouTube or maybe SoundCloud just to check works of different artists, or maybe I have something in my mind because I watched some kind of movie. So because music is very important and it adds a lot actually to the environment of the game. You also need to think about which kind of sounds you're gonna have in your game, whether it's gonna be voiceover or there will be just music and some sounds. So this is very important too. So after that we are moving to the game menus. This is the second part. So here I normally write all of the menus which I'm gonna have in the game. So for example, when I start the game, which kind of menus I'm gonna have, which kind of buttons I'm gonna have, whether it's gonna be like a shop, options, like single player, exit button, and then I create very brief designs of those. For example, you can see like I just did like very brief design, how many buttons I'm gonna have here, what are those buttons, and then I'm basically created all of the other menus which are going to be in the game. And I really had to think about which kind of menus I'm gonna have and how they're gonna look like. But for now, it's just like brief look. After when I'm going to create design for that, it's going to change, of course. And then we are moving to in-game menu. So after you start the actual game, so after you press the start button in your game, then any user will see the in-game UI, in-game user interface. And for that, I also create another very rough image that actually shows what kind of in-game UI I'm gonna have. So for example, I'm gonna have joystick here, and what kind of buttons I'm gonna have. Is it inventory button, or is it like a pause button, or is it a map, or is it a health bar? All this stuff are very important too. And then we go, of course, to the pause menu, what kind of buttons we're gonna see there, and so on. So after that, we are moving to mechanics. So what kind of mechanics your game is going to have when the player is going to play it. So what does the player, whether he kills the enemies or maybe he does something else, tries to, maybe it's a quest game, or maybe it's so all these things have to be in the game. What actually the player is doing in order to win the game, you know? Everything has to be here in the mechanics. And sometimes it also includes control, so how player interacts with different buttons and joysticks and so on. You also have to, you need to write down the modes which your game's going to have. For example, I just write like I have 3 difficulties in my game, which depends on health and damage of the enemies. And also I need to write down some assets in the inventory assets which are going to have my game. So I'm gonna have like weapon, medkits, some different additional things that make the gameplay more interesting. So then we are moving to the 5th section, which is winning the match. So it tells what happens in the end of the game, how player actually wins the game and what's gonna happen there, and what helps the player to win the match. So that's why I write here score, currency, because you have to write, if you have a in-game currency, then you have to write it down here too. So after that, we are moving to the 6th section, which is assets. And here I normally write the names of the levels, how many levels I'm gonna have, and what are those levels. Then I'm writing down which kind of characters I'm gonna have, which are enemies, which are maybe companions or bosses, how many of them, what kind of animation they're gonna do, which kind of types of the enemies I'm gonna have in my game. And after that, I also have another assets. Those are weapon. So the weapons can be, I also need to write down what kind of sound I will need, how many, like what kind of guns I'm gonna have, what they're gonna do, what's gonna be the difference between guns, all this kind of stuff. So, and then we're moving to audio. So here I'm writing down, because we had previously the section of audio, but that one was like just general idea of the audio. Here we have to write down how many tracks we're gonna have in the game, which one's gonna be for menu, which one's gonna be in the game, whether we're gonna have how many sounds for the guns we're gonna have, how many for explosions, for the buttons, or everything, all this kind of stuff. Then we have to write down cinematic. If our game has a cinematic, yeah, so we have to write down what kind of cinematics is going to be, how many cinematics, whether they're going to be placed in the beginning, in the end, in the middle. Then I also have like this additional section which is extra rooms, so it's like some kind of extra things that are going to be added in the game just to make the gameplay a little bit more different. And then we're going to section 7, which is basically our story. So we're writing down here what happened in the game, if it's a story-driven game, and also I normally would write here whole script of the game. I didn't finish it yet, so at the moment I just have brief story which explains what happened during the game, what's happening during the game, and what kind of pre-story. And yeah, I guess after that I'm just having the last section, which is game description for media. So for example, when you publish your game anywhere in any store or website, so you have to have some kind of description of the game. And here I just brief description with including the basic features of the game, and also including the pre-story of the game. So this is basically it, and I hope it's more or less clear to you, and I hope it's gonna be useful for you. So thanks again, and